Ingrid Pillar. Ingrid Pillar is a distinguished professor of applied linguistics. She's actually distinguished. It's a title, and it's something that I wasn't quite aware of up until very recently. So she's very, very well known, and we're very fortunate to have Professor Pillar with us. And she's a professor of distinguished professor of applied linguistics at Macquarie University here in Sydney, in Australia. Her research expertise is in intercultural communication, the social linguistics of language learning, and multilingualism. It's something that's very, very dear to most of us. And Professor Pillar will be mentioning quite a few, making some points that will have a lot to do with us as second or other language speakers, of course, and not just from a teaching point of view. Okay. And she's also expert in bilingual education. She serves as editor-in-chief in the International Social Linguistics Journal, Multilingua, and curates the Social Linguistics Portal Language on the Move. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce. Welcome, Professor Pillar, and take it away. Thank you very much, Ingrid.
Okay. Well, thanks, Alex, and hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me and see me very well. I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you today, and I'll just move over to share my screen with you now. So I hope that works and you can all see my screen all right.
It's all good. It's all good.
All good? Excellent.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm pleased to hear that. So yeah, my topic for today is literacy in heritage language maintenance. Some of you will have heard me speak previously at the community schools conferences like 2 years ago, and you might remember that there I used a comparison where I said language is like a wheel. Language is a tool, and if you have one language, that's like one wheel. You know, one wheel can get you places, and that's fantastic. Another way to get around is to have two wheels, to have a big one and a small one. That's also excellent to, you know, use your wheels and get around, but the best way to move fast and smoothly is actually to have both your wheels nicely inflated and nicely balanced, and that's the way to go fast. And that's the same with language, that's the same with bilingualism, except of course, or as long as the people who made the wheels knew what they were doing. Unfortunately, when it comes to literacy in bilingualism, the people who make the wheels all that often don't know what they are doing. And so that's my topic for today. How can we actually support the literacy learning of heritage language in a better way? Now, to see where I'm coming from, I need to talk a bit about literacy in language learning or in language generally. We often say things like, you know, I know a language, I speak German, I speak English, I speak Chinese, and we don't really make a distinction between spoken and written language. However, of course, the full proficiency range of a language relates to the 4 skills, to speaking and hearing, speaking and listening on the one hand, and the written skills, so reading and writing on the other. And that's what I mean when I talk about literacy. I mean the skills of reading and writing, basically. Now, going back to my wheels analogy, what happens when the people who make the wheels don't know what they are doing is a situation where the bilingual person has low levels of literacy in both their languages. And I'll get to how often that happens later. So that's the SADI on my screen. I've got the SADI there because that's actually a really unfortunate outcome in minority education when you have low literate persons who don't have the right literacy proficiencies that are really needed in today's world. The much more common outcome is the one where you have, you know, this large wheel and the small wheel, where and that's sort of neutral in terms of linguistic benefits. That the neutral smiley in the middle. So where you have high level of literacy skills in one language and low levels or no literacy skills in the other language. Now, typically in the Australian context, language A is English, and the other language, the heritage language, is the one where a student has not learned how to read and write. And finally, the ideal that we're sort of aiming for is a situation where a student has all the 4 skills in both their languages. Let me just ask you, or think, I mean, obviously I can't ask because this is not an interactive situation, but what do you think, how frequently each of these scenarios occurs? You might be thinking, oh, well, I mean, bilingual kids, you know, they are double plus no matter what. I'll show you some numbers from the US now, and you'll be surprised to find that the most frequent outcome of heritage language education is actually the situation in the middle that's kind of neutral with regards to the benefits of bilingualism, where you have high levels of proficiency in language A, that's the dominant language in the US, that's English as it is in Australia, and no or very low levels of proficiency in literacy in the heritage language. That's the most frequent situation. The second most frequent situation, about 1/5 of heritage language learners are actually fortunate enough to acquire strong reading and writing skills, not only in English, but also in the other language. And that's really when you find most of the benefits of bilingualism, both for the individual and for a society, and where, you know, you are able to function fully as an adult in both your languages, in both your communities. The most concerning outcome is, of course, that also close to 1/5 of heritage language learners end up in a situation where they neither have strong literacy skills in English nor in their heritage language. And that's a really difficult situation to be in today's world. As I told you, these figures are from the US. But now let me show you some Australian figures. They look slightly differently because, you know, we've done different research in Australia. The figures that you see here on the slide are from the OECD's program for international assessment of adult competencies, also known as PIAC. That happens every couple of years. So it looks at literacy and numeracy and digital skills of the adult population in a couple of countries. And it distinguishes 5 literacy levels. Now, to make it a bit easier here, I've kind of grouped them into 3 levels. So there is level below level 1 and level 1. That's very low literacy skills. That's, and this is only in English now. That's fairly low literacy skills. That's around the level of literacy that you can expect someone to have who's gone through elementary education. So basically their literacy is at elementary level. In Australia, 13.7% of the population, of the adult population, have such low literacy skills. And that's really extremely concerning in a sense that these are the people who, you know, are unable really to fully participate in our contemporary knowledge economy in a democratic society. One study that we've recently been looking at here at Macquarie is, for instance, readability of COVID-19 instructions. And one of the things that we've been finding is that a lot of the government information, a lot of the public service information is actually pitched at a higher level. So you have a fairly large number of people, and I mean 13.7% of the Australian population translates to well over 2 million people who will have difficulties understanding or reading public service information related to COVID restrictions. The level 2 and 3 are high school kind of graduation level, so that's where the majority of the population sits, and level 4 and 5 are high levels of literacy that are typically associated with a university education. Now, so that's the explanation of the purple figures and the bar graphs. I hope that was reasonably clear. Now, what I want you to focus on is the numbers below the bar graphs in black and gray. And that's for ESB and NSB. So ESB stands for English background and NSB stands for non-English speaking backgrounds. And so these are the figures of the Australian population from an English speaking background and from a non-English speaking background who achieve at each of these 3 levels. Now, one more thing that I have to, that you have to keep in mind here is that these ESB and non-ESB figures are for the Australian born. So what I've taken out of the figures is actually all the migrants. So you don't get any distortion between first generation immigrants who may have come as new migrants and may not speak English very well. The figures that you've got here for the NSB population are people born and educated in Australia. And among children or adults who were born and raised in Australia, educated in this country, but speak a language other than English at home, 14.7% of them can only read and write in English at the level of an elementary school students. So this is a really problematic figure. And it is, 3% higher than it is for the English-speaking background students. Now, of course, language background is not the only factor that results in low literacy outcomes. Parental education, socioeconomic background, in particular, are also very, very important. If we go to the other end of the scale, to the high achievers, we find another significant discrepancy in that people from English-speaking background homes actually are quite a bit more likely, with 16.9%, to achieve these very high levels of literacy where they are able to read and write with confidence and comfortably highly academic texts such as are required at university. And only 10% of adults from non-English speaking backgrounds achieve such high levels. Okay, now let's for a moment put aside these 14.7% of NSB students who don't achieve high literacy levels in English. So that's obviously something where we have a problem and something that we need to look at. How can we fix that? But let's now look at the much larger number of 85% or so of students, of Australian adults from non-English speaking backgrounds who have, literacy levels at the level of the English speaking background people and who do well. what we still find with this population is they read and write very well in English, but they may fall short, and they are quite likely to fall short on literacy in their home language, in their heritage language. Now, what does that mean? Let me quote you just from the experience of Sarla Sawari. I'm quoting from an article by Sheila Pham, Locked Out of the Mother Tongue, where she quotes this young woman, very accomplished and aspiring writer from an Afghan background, born and raised in Australia, who says, my experience has been one of being locked out of Dari because I am basically illiterate in the language. Although I'm quite fluent, I can't read or write it myself. It blocks you off from delving into the literature of that language and the knowledge that it carries of the culture. And that's the most typical experience of heritage language learners in Australia. So around, as I said earlier, 22% or so, a fifth of the non-English speaking background population achieve high levels of literacy in both their languages. 80% actually don't achieve high levels of literacy or don't learn to read and write at a level that allows them to read confidently, fluently, texts of that go really beyond anything that's a bit more complicated than, let's say, a primary reader. And that really can, hurts them in a sense that they may be able to communicate with their families and have this kind of what's often called kitchen language, the kitchen language of the second generation. So they're comfortable interacting, speaking the language, but they really feel locked out a bit of the larger culture that is carried through literacy. Another reason why it's important to consider what can we do about these large numbers of children who grow up in Australia lacking the confidence or lacking the ability to read and write, and what does that do for their confidence, as in this example, is that, as you may have seen this recent report from about who gets to tell Australian stories, about the underrepresentation of linguistically and culturally diverse Australians in the media. There is, of course, this experience of marginalization. And one thing I need to talk about a bit is that a language changes in the context of migration. The language changes in the sense that, back in the country of origin, it's a dominant language. It may not be the dominant language, but you have a different scenario. All languages become marginalized in the context of migration. So heritage language learners generally have that experience of marginalization of their language, and very often this goes hand in hand with other aspects of marginalization, the experience of racism, for instance. So there are all kinds of differences, and that leads to some sort of linguistic insecurity that we find in people who don't have strong literacy skills, particularly if they don't have strong literacy skills in both languages, but also if you don't have those literacy skills in the heritage language. Now, I've got a couple of points here in brackets. The couple of points that I've put in brackets are lower self-esteem, perceived stress, negative affect, depression, and anxiety symptoms. I've put them in brackets because there is a large number of qualitative studies from around the world that actually show that second-generation children are much more affected by mental health issues. At the same time, I've put it in brackets because there is a huge variety of experience, significant diversity. These things affect different people in different ways, and it would be wrong to say this is true of all second-generation persons. This is not, so I don't want you to go away with that message. However, I want you to go away with the message, a message that many parents, many migrant parents know, that their children will experience marginalization. They might experience racism. They might experience all kinds of difficulties. And so as parents, of course, we want to protect our children. And many parents actually give up the heritage language precisely because they want to protect their children, and they don't teach it because they kind of think the best way for them is to integrate. Except one thing that we are finding is, as long as other markers of difference persist, children, then they become adults, of course, may still experience marginalization. And one thing that can help them then is actually being grounded, being strong in both worlds. So a good protection and against all kinds of experiences of exclusion is actually being strong in both your English language and your heritage language. And that's important for all of us, precisely because of media reports such as these, where we know that the diverse Australia is underrepresented in the media. We need stronger voices. We need more confident writers to actually enter the media. So this is not only a story of exclusion, this is also a story of we want people who are able and capable of and confident enough to raise their voices in all their languages. So what can we do? Now, the best practice to ensure high levels of proficiency, particularly in literacy in both languages, is through dual language education. Another important point here to remember is that literacy is usually acquired through the education system. That's true for everyone, irrespective of what kind of background you have. Children learn how to speak in the home, but they go to school specifically to learn how to read and write. The best evidence that we have in terms of bilingual literacy skills is really the ideal scenario is the golden rule, where we have sort of 50-50 representation, where we have symmetry between the two languages, so instructional symmetry, that both languages are used as medium of instruction, so they are used not only as in language class, but they are also used to actually teach content. So teach math, teach political science, teach sociology, teach, whatever content, social studies, religious studies, the sciences, whatever you teach. So ideally, both languages are symmetry. You have resource symmetry, so that means kind of similar numbers of books in both languages. You have teacher symmetry, that means all teachers are bilingual, but ideally you have teachers from both backgrounds for who each language is the stronger language, and ideally you have student symmetry, so similar number of students for both languages. That's the ideal scenario. In Australia, we pretty much don't have that. What we actually have is something that one of my PhD students has, Victoria Benz, in the book that I've got here, has researched extensively. What we actually have is an unsupportive policy environment. We have the dominance of English, we have parental apathy, and we have a lack of student motivation. So that's pretty depressing. Now, I don't want you to be depressed, because this is something that we cannot change, or we cannot change in the short term. But what we can change, and that's where each and every one of you, of us, as language teachers, as community language teachers, as parents, as just people who care about the next generation of Australians, what we can do is the following. we can actually support children to learn how to read. And in order to tell you what it is that we need to be doing, I need to be talking a little bit about what learning how to read involves, whether that's learning how to read in one or more languages. And learning how we learn to read, we go through a couple of different stages. So there is the emerging pre-reader stage, that's preschool, that's before we go to school. I'll say what that involves or I'll say what it involves right now. So that's sort of the stage where children from day one, in a sense, they learn how to read and write, because what helps them to read, what creates the basis for reading, is knowing words. All those nursery rhymes that you kind of think, you know, what's the point of that? We just do it to amuse our children. We don't just do it to amuse children, you know, stuff like hickory dickory dock. That's actually fantastic in giving children the skills to segment language, to understand sounds. And that's really, being able to segment sounds is one of the most important skills once you get to the reading and writing stage, because you need to learn how to match letters to sounds. So all those experiences that young children have, through rich vocabulary, through learning about sounds, learning to manipulate language, but also learning to interact, learning to respond to questions, for instance. All that is like, you know, something that creates the foundation for their reading learning once they enter school. Once they enter school, they become novice readers. They really need to learn how to match letters and sounds. So they need to become really decoding experts. So they need to decode the visual shape of the signs on the page. For English, that's the alphabet. For many other languages, that's the alphabet. Or for all the alphabetic languages, then we have the syllabary languages. So there really is this connection between the letter shape and a sound. And then we have Chinese characters, which are more logographic, still being able to match recognize visual shapes, decode them, match them to sounds is very important there too. And of course, you need to match all those letter shapes and those sounds that you know how to match then to actual words and concepts. So that's what the novice reader needs to learn. They need to become decoding readers. Now, these 4-3 stages happen in elementary age. So emerging pre-reader happens before children go to school. 2 and 3 happens in elementary education. And then there is a gap, and the gap is there on my slide, because not everyone, as I told you earlier, then actually is able to make that transition and goes on to become a fluent comprehending reader or an expert reader. Where we can do most is really at stages 1, 2, and 3. Also, because that's where we still have the children in our care more than anything, as community language teachers in particular, as parents too. So let's talk a bit about the emerging pre-reader. What can you do as a bilingual teacher? Well, really, it's about books, books, books. Expose young children from day one. And I think as community teachers, one thing that you can do is actually get your parents on board. By the time you get children in the community school, by the time teachers kind of get their hold on students, they already have so many experiences, and parents really need to be on board. So one thing that all of us can do is actually lobby parents, support parents. And if we are parents, of course, you know, give our children the joy of reading and being able to experience the pleasure of books from a very early age. That's going to be so good for them. And in particular, don't worry about which language or what. All kind of reading material is really, really important. But as you still have that chance, really support the home language. Now, our libraries, our public libraries in New South Wales are really very good and have lots of material also in other languages. So make use of those resources and lobby for more resources. The photo that I've got here is actually from the public library in Hamburg in Germany, where I was spending some research time last year, and where they have a fantastic library section, which is all headed under the title Eine gemeinsame Welt, which is like a joint world, and then has lots and lots of children's books in all kinds of languages. So that's really fantastic. Our own public libraries are also doing very well. And one thing where I really think actually the pandemic is almost a bit of a chance to think about new ways of doing things is also to just use online resources more. I think we've all just, I mean, most of us are pretty much over Zoom and over online and everything, but at the same time, I think we've had a chance to discover all the kinds of resources that are out there online. And it's very important. And I think it's a good opportunity to actually also look around, you know, outside Australia, what's on in terms of literacy materials in your home country, in the country of origin, that can be used with young children. Now, while I'm really happy to talk up these, you know, this variety of resources that the digital world has made available to us, there's also one thing that we know from research that is actually quite dangerous, and that is don't just plonk your child in front of a device and let them play with some literacy game on their own, or, you know, give them something to watch. That's a very passive way of learning and doesn't actually give them all that much in terms of becoming, you know, gaining all those foundations that the pre-reader needs to gain. Because language fundamentally is a social skills. We don't learn language from a screen. Kids don't learn language from a screen. They need to interact. And like a lot of good research has shown, for instance, that even bedtime stories can be differentially beneficial. And one thing that really makes bedtime stories so beneficial is that parents talk to their children about what it is they are reading. They ask them questions. So they don't just read to them, but they interact with them. That's a really important skill for little children to learn. And it's typically middle-class parents who are pretty good at that and who convey an advantage on their children in this way, because they kind of already model ways of dealing with books that are very valued in schools, whereas some parents would just, you know, and that's what a screen does, just you read, you pay attention, but it's a very passive skill. The child is not socialized into interacting around books, and that's really what gives them a fantastic foundation. So we can do a lot around heritage language maintenance in the early years and make use of the early years, because that's where you are in control in a way that you'll never be again. And also that's the foundation on which all later language learning, and particularly reading and writing, builds. So lay those foundations, and we can all lay them irrespective of what the policy environment is like in Australia. Let's move on to the novice reader. That's the kind of level where you meet children in school. As I said, the novice reader is really a code breaker. They are code breakers in that they need to break the code of the visual symbols on the page, but also the codes of sounds. Link the visual sign on the page to a sound that they already know, and then link it all to a word. So become vocabulary code breakers, if you will. What really makes people or children learn to do that is practice, practice, practice. So practice is what's important there. And that's the challenge for community readers, I think, because for community teachers, excuse me. In the community schools, often already children come along with kind of weaker skills, and then you just don't have the kind of time that that is needed to successfully transition readers to the next stage in that language. In contrast to English, for instance, which, you know, really takes over. So I think one lesson that is important there is to be really, really creative, because at that stage, that's around the stage when actually, if you can get children through that stage, then they become independent readers. And once they become independent readers, they do their own thing, and their reading grows and grows and grows. So you really need to give them that enthusiasm and that foundation that comes with practice, but that also keeps them going and keeps them engaged at a time when, you know, there is so much competition. It's not only that the heritage language or learning how to read and write in the heritage language competes with English. It also competes with sports and with a million other things that these children want to do. I also need to acknowledge here that different language combinations have different challenges. If your heritage language is one that also uses the Latin alphabet, of course your challenge is a lot less than if you need to teach another alphabet or another writing system. And these are certainly challenges that are different for different languages, and every kind of community school related to each and every language needs to figure out some of these challenges for themselves. But one thing that we can all learn from each other is just the importance of having reading and writing materials in a child's life. And the reason this is so important is because at around the time we are talking about now, early elementary, there is something that kicks in, and that's called the Matthew effect. And I'm not sure if you've ever heard about the Matthew effect. It's also called the Matthew effect of accumulated advantage. It's the basic principle of, excuse me, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It's named Matthew, not after some poor guy who didn't learn how to read. It's named after the Matthew Gospel in the Christian Bible, where Jesus at some point says, those who have shall be given, and those who don't have, even the little that they have, will be taken away from them. In reading, that means that good readers improve faster and faster because the joy of reading carries its own reward. So someone who has had lots of positive experiences with language and with books at an early age before they go to school learns how to decode faster. And then that kind of gives them more pleasure and motivates them more, and they will go on to actually read and write by themselves, and that will teach them new vocabulary, new content. They will discover that it's all interesting and that there is a whole world out there in books where you can get lost and where you can learn and where you can grow. And so these kids who make that discovery learn faster and faster. Whereas readers who don't make that discovery, or who start out maybe with weaker language skills, and then it takes them longer to learn how to decode, it takes them longer to learn actually the alphabet or the writing system of the language, it takes them longer to you know, to sound out words, and so it's really boring and laborious, and they don't take pleasure out of it. So they get stuck in a negative cycle, whereas the good readers get stuck in a virtuous, positive, self-reinforcing cycle. So that's the key message here for all community teachers, for all parents. Make sure you expose your children to all kinds of reading materials. And you know what, it doesn't even matter whether this is like a fairy tale story or the cereal box that you look at for breakfast. What matters is to actually bring literacy into your everyday lives and make it all interesting and make it fun, and create that lifelong spirit of inquiry that will be in good stead for your children as they grow up and as they need to function in a society like ours that is characterized by the need to learn forever and ever. And so lifelong learning is enabled by acquiring literacy skills in childhood as early as, you know, to lay that foundation from day one, because lifelong learning basically involves being able to read. That's where you get your learning from in the long run. That's pretty much it from me. Where can you find out more? Alex showed you the two books that or two of the books that I've written, Linguistic Diversity and Social Justice and Intercultural Communication. Both of them have chapters on bilingual education. If you can't get your hand on books right now, or that's not so much your thing, make sure to log on to Language on the Move, where we run a regular research blog. At the moment, we've got a series going about literacy challenges and all kinds of aspects of questions around learning how to read and write, and the ability to read and write in more than one language. There you can also connect to our research. Most recently, a PhD thesis that has just been completed by Yining Wang about the heritage language maintenance of Chinese migrant children and their families. So lots of relevant research that you can connect to through the Language on the Move website. And we've also got a YouTube channel, and on our YouTube channel we've currently got 4 videos and a little video series that gives you a new video pretty much every 2 weeks or so around questions of reading and writing. So head over there if you're interested in videos. You can look up The Invention of Writing, the Latin alphabet's takeover of the world's languages, or currently my favorite, The Mind-Altering Magic of Literacy. With that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll be very happy to take comments and questions.
Thank you, if I may, Ingrid. It was great. I mean, for those of you who have seen the comments in the chat, it's all very positive. We've got some great questions now. If I may, I'm not sure if you've seen them, Ingrid, but
no, I haven't actually.
Oh, great. Look, I'll just read them out. Now this one was directed to me, but it's from one of our Tamil schools from Tirunantapumat. And he asked, what are your thoughts on introducing alphabets before formal education in primary school, year 1? He's specifying. He says, I thought we shouldn't be introducing or writing or the alphabet before a child knows the sounds of that language. However, most of the teachers who have their primary education abroad tend to teach writing straight away in preschool. Can you please suggest a way? Now, the thing is, this happens not only in this particular Tamil situation, but I've seen this we see this a lot in other languages.
Mhm. Look, basically two answers there. I think one answer is there certainly is no harm in introducing letters and shapes from an early age. And I mean, we do that in English, actually. I mean, there are so many products now. You can buy quilts that, you know, baby quilts or baby wraps that have the alphabet on it. I think letters and shapes are being taught very early. Also in the Chinese world, actually learning how to recognize characters at toddler stage is not uncommon at all. So there certainly is no evidence to suggest that you, I don't know, should hold off showing letters or writing systems to children. Having said that, I think what you want to be careful of is not do that in a too formal manner. You want your children to have the joy of reading. You don't want to scare them off, kind of, or scar them with kind of rote learning exercises that they may be too young to understand. I think there is a huge satisfaction, a huge confidence booster for children when they actually figure out some letters. I mean, I think everyone who's raised a child remembers at least two moments, you know, the child learned to walk, the first steps, and the child, they first wrote their name or they first figured out a letter. So it's like real, there are two moments in life where you are unambiguously approved by everyone. You learn to walk, you learn to read. So there is no need to keep that joy and pleasure away from children, but it's important for it to be joyful and pleasurable and not, I guess, you know, force them into something. And that's really a danger there around the pedagogy, I would think. You don't want to, yeah, I guess give them the impression that this is something that is hard and difficult and not joyful, because that will turn them off. And if you lose them, or once you get into this resistance mode, and you know, children don't just learn language, they also develop. And one thing that we know that happens, of course, in somewhere in the primary years is they need to gain their independence, and they also want to impose their own, and that's very important. So if you get into a mode where language learning, where writing, reading, where doing something in the other language is stress for the family, for the child resists, and you have this weekly struggle. No, I don't want to go to community school. No, that's terrible. Then that's when you're fighting a losing battle. And so it needs to be their fun and their joy.
Ingrid, there's another one it's a topical issue now. With all of this social distancing and the COVID-19, we've been asked. I'm speaking on behalf of the community languages school sector here in New South Wales. What's happened is that schools have been asked to go so-called online as of the other day. So they're missing out on essentially 6 weeks of. Well, 4 weeks of instruction, basically, and then the holiday. So it's going to be a huge gap. Now, Jasna Novak-Milic, pardon my pronunciation, this is what she's asking in relation to what I've just said. So she's saying with some language communities becoming smaller and smaller, with less and less confident speakers and resources not available, not always at hand, that is. Also with distances being between people becoming greater, do you think online, and she's got in brackets Zoom, reading sessions could be beneficial for both parents and children to join together? So how effective is this? Now, we're all going online. How effective would it be to do something distance like this? She's asking, I'm assuming.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, I mean, in a sense, my idea is as good as yours, or I don't know more than anyone else in this room, or in the Zoom. But my sense is of course, we live through a time of crisis, and that has made many things more difficult, but it's also been an opportunity. And looking at things like, you know, bringing families together and reading together is like a fantastic opportunity. Why not, you know, get family overseas into your Zoom and get grandma back in the country of origin read to the child. So I think there are new ways and new opportunities that we should be thinking about. We need to be thinking about creatively. I mean, there is no point kind of playing dead and rolling over. But yeah, I mean, I think is that an answer?
I would hope so. Look, I think there's a lot to be said there. Ingrid, look, we've got a few more minutes to go, and there are quite a few questions. Now, I've actually got one. There's another one. How about using bilingual books? What about using? There are two questions that have come up with relation to literacy. Bilingual books for, now I'm assuming these are for second language learners, and then simplified readers so for the kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think everything that you can use, I mean, that was the key point I was trying to make, really. One of the problems with heritage languages, and again, this affects different languages differently, is of course this resource scarcity. Where do I actually get books? Where do I get resources from? And as I said, you know, our public libraries have really made an effort, and it's important to keep lobbying them. You know, if you can buy books, that's really, really important. So any kind of resource is beneficial. So there is nothing where I would say, oh, you know, if you have the chance to read your child from a simplified reader, a bilingual reader, whatever, there's no point keeping it from them. So the challenge really is to attract resources, to gain resources. So I mean, as I said, libraries in community schools are really important. Maybe form a cooperative with other parents in your language background and circle books around, because, you know, I mean, all of us can only, books are expensive and you can only do so much. And although one thing that's really cool about children is, I mean, they get their favorite books and then they read it again and again and again, and you read it a million times, and as adults that may be boring, but it's actually one of the pleasures of childhood, this repetition. And so, you know, make sure they have these favorite books, and they love those. But also, as I said, a cooperative, for instance, where you actually join resources with other parents. I think whatever you can do to bring reading materials and even conversations about books into your child's life, that's going to be beneficial. And it's not only beneficial linguistically, it's also beneficial just for your relationship with your child. And I mean, I think it's a good thing to read together, and that's good all around for your family health, for your relationships, and of course for the literacy of your child.
Okay, now we've got quite a few other questions. I'll see if I can read one, if you don't mind. One last one. This is from Susanna. Do you think the best scenario for literacy and heritage language maintenance will be including the language learning inside the education system? So actually, because it's not a KLA. Now, this is the eternal question here in Australia. I think this is a big one, isn't it? It's a big one. So getting a policy. Yeah. All right. So
yes, that would be the best way. Totally lobby for that. I mean, that's so important. Lobby for other languages in school. Every Australian child, no matter what their background, should learn another language. Learning another language is as important as learning math, and I don't know why we keep it away from our children. So that's really, really important. Lobby for it. But what I've been trying to tell, or the message here is, I mean, I've been in this space for like 20 years and I've been lobbying. It hasn't changed much. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's me, but I know many other people, and there is no point in being totally frustrated. Let's do what we can. I mean, so yes, absolutely, changing the policy environment for anyone who hears this and, you know, has the ability to influence policy decisions, absolutely. But while we are waiting for policy to change, and while we are waiting for languages to become, you know, a regular school subject, let's do what we can.
Okay, okay. Excellent.
Can I, maybe Alex, just one thing, I sort of see lots of things in the chat, but I don't really have the ability to multitask to the degree that I read the questions and, you know, speak at the same time. But if anyone missed out, we've got a really interesting and lively comment and discussion section on Language on the Move. So feel free to head over there and leave a comment, and I try to respond as I go along or whenever I can.
Excellent. Okay, Ingrid, look, I think we can wrap up there. And I'd like to say, first of all, again, thank you so much. I mean, the comments have been great. You've brought to our attention the importance of literacy, the importance of reading to our kids, the importance of language acquisition, language learning. You've according to all the feedback, it's given people quite a few ideas, and it's been very inspiring. So again, thank you so much. I'd like to say good night or good evening to Ingrid, but I'd ask people to stay on just for one more minute. So Ingrid, thank you very much. You're free to go and have dinner. We'll see you again hopefully soon, but everybody stay on. Thanks, Ingrid. All right. Okay, everybody else. For those of you that are still online, so I should just say, by the way, before we finish, we have to acknowledge the Community Languages Schools program of the New South Wales Department of Education, who assisted in the funding for this for these webinars. But it's the New South Wales Federation of Community Language Schools, as you know, that is providing these webinars for the community languages schools here in New South Wales. But for those, we had 130 odd people this evening, which isn't too bad because you're all zoomed out. We know that, but we've had people from the ACT, great, New South Wales, of course, ACT, Victoria, Queensland. A bit further afield, we've had people from New Zealand, Sweden, Norway, India, China, Philippines, Scotland, and Germany. Now, I don't know if I've missed out on anyone, but we've had quite a few people join us. Most of us, I've noticed, I know that they're mostly community languages schools teachers, but the word is getting out, and it's a great thing. What Ingrid is saying is very, very important. What Professor Piller is saying. We need to, sure, there's lobbying that needs to be done. We need to engage the parents. We know that. We talked about those 3 points. We need to engage the parents. And I find that that's one of the biggest things for us, especially now for the community languages schools, because we've got this period now of another 4 weeks of having to go online. So without further ado, I'd like to, before we say goodnight, I'm just going to share this screen with you. For the 21st of September, we have Professor John Hayek. Now, sure, he's a professor, but he's a great speaker. Okay? He's a teacher of languages. He, just like Ingrid, he speaks around the world. He's a linguist as well. And he'll be speaking to us about our sector and our languages on the 21st. And on the 15th of October, we've got some other things happening. We've got some surprises. But for sure, we have definitely Jeremy Harmer, who is huge. He's absolutely huge as well. He's an author. He's an academic, but he's very, very big. For those of you who have taught English anywhere in the world, you've come across his books, okay? So this guy is massive, and he's a great speaker. So he'll be talking to you as teachers, giving you great ideas, okay? But two more, 21st of September, 15th of October, same time. Keep an eye out for the emails. And apart from that, I will bid everybody good evening. Thank you yet again for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. And happy teaching. Keep it up. Get the kids reading. All right. All the best.